Hello everybody, welcome to today's flight. Today's flight is going to focus on the basics of VOR flying, specifically with the FlyJSim 737-200. The concepts that we talk about today can be basically applied to most other airplanes when flying by VOR, but we're going to apply it to this aircraft because it is such a fun airplane to do it with. We're going to basically use a predetermined route that I put together, and we're going to do these routes based on the Victor Airway system, even though typically we might fly in the higher altitudes using jet routes above 18,000, but I've chosen to do just some lower altitude flying at about 250 knots, around 10,000 feet. The nice thing for demonstration purposes with the Victor Airways is that typically they are shorter segments with more turns in them, so that we could do a better demonstration of different situations over a shorter period of time. So the basic goal of this flight, we're going to basically pretend that we've been cleared for a route from Baton Rouge to Memphis International. We're not actually even going to buy the landing. We're just going to fly the route. That's the purpose of this demonstration. And we're going to again, pretend that we've been cleared direct to a VOR called Natchez, and then from there we're going to fly on this route Victor 554 to Monroe, Victor 397 to Greenville, and then Victor 94 to Holly Springs, and then on to toward the airport. We might even extend it a little bit further if need be. So no big deal. Of course, this is not a very efficient route that you would fly in real life, potentially, if you could fly straighter when you would. But again, for the demonstration purposes, this should work very well. I have the weather turned off and standard conditions set, so we won't be seeing these weather cells. Anyway, let's go ahead and get started. The airplane is pretty much ready to go. Actually, what we need to do is just tune in a few frequencies, so let's go ahead and get that started. So let's go ahead and look at the first VOR that we're going to fly to, which is Natchez, and that's on 110.0. So let's have a look at where we would actually put that in this airplane. We can see here that down on the center pedestal, we have these things called comms, left and right, or comm 1 and comm 2, that's for your communications, and then navs, a left and right, which is nav 1 and nav 2. We can basically go with that naming scheme. So we said we needed to put in 110.0, so let's go ahead and put that in. Now you could use the arrow directions to click, or you can actually just use scroll wheel as well, so it's very convenient. So we're going to put this on 110.0. We also want to make sure that we're actively tuned into it, so you use this switch here to switch back and forth. You can see the light going on and off on the different sides. So you want it to be lit up, and then we know that we're actually actively tuned into that one. Okay, so we got 110.0. Now, what we're going to do in this fictional flight is basically pretend that once we're off the ground and picking up a signal, ATC is going to tell us fly direct to Natchez VOR, and then resume on navigation. Right. So once we set it up to fly direct to the VOR, we'll do that on nav 1, but then we'll have to set up nav 2 VOR to basically display what we're going to do next. So we're going to also need Natchez on the nav 2. So let's go ahead and put that 110.0. Okay, and when I mentioned before nav 1 and nav 2 VOR, I mean basically we're talking about a thing called an HSI, horizontal situation indicator. We'll talk about that in a moment. So now we have it set up on both. They're both active, of course, right? But if you notice, we also have two other frequency banks that are available to us. So let's go ahead and put in the next VOR after Natchez, which is Monroe on 117.2. Okay, so let's go ahead and put that here and over here. Great. So our radios, for the most part, are set up, ready to go. Normally you would do some more setting up on the ground, but to get this video going, we're going to go ahead and execute our takeoff roll, get airborne. We'll engage the autopilot a little earlier than I normally would, and then we'll once we're airborne, we'll have to wait for the VOR to actually come into range. We're a little bit too far. That's why we're getting this off flag. This flag here basically means that we're not even receiving the signal yet. And so what we'll do is we'll tune back in a moment once we're airborne,
80 knots,
and climbing and receiving that signal. So we'll see you in 1 second.
E1, rotate.
All right, everybody, we are tuned back in here, climbing through 4,000 feet. The autopilot's engaged. We should be picking up a signal pretty soon. In the meantime, what I'm going to do... Oh, there we go. The signal just came in. Distance showed up. Needle deflection occurred, and some other things. So let's just keep the airplane climbing for now. We're on autopilot, like we mentioned before. I'm going to change the mode from control wheel steering to indicated airspeed pitch command. So now the airplane will actually adjust the pitch to maintain this 250 knots based on my climb power setting. And I'm also going to switch the control wheel steering over to follow the heading select bug. See, if I turn it now, nothing happens. However, if I go ahead and hit heading select, now the autopilot will basically follow whatever I dialed in there, okay? So anyway, now we have an active signal. We're going to basically listen to air traffic control, and they come up to us and they say, United 576, fly direct Natchez VOR. Upon reaching Natchez, resume on navigation. Okay? And basically what that's telling us is that they want us to take our airplane, which has just departed out of Baton Rouge, and we're somewhere over here. You can see the direct course, okay? But what they want us to do is they want us to basically determine where the VOR. We know that it's to the north, and also once we've determined where it is, fly directly to it. Okay, so we're gonna have to do that. We've already tuned the frequency. We're coming up on 10,000. The airplane's leveling off, so let's go ahead and just pull the power back. I want to fly this flight basically at 250 knots just to give us more time between VORs to talk about things. For now, I'm going to pull it back to about 55%, and it should bleed off. Okay, so let's step over to decide how are we going to actually figure out what's the direct course to the VOR. Now, for those that know what an RMI is, you probably can already see something going on there, but we're not really demonstrating the RMI in this video. What we're going to do is we're going to use this thing called the HSI, which is a horizontal situation indicator. And basically what makes it an HSI is the fact that it's a heading indicator that has a VOR indicator on top of it, which is what this needle is, okay, and this course selector. So this knob is basically our course selector, and you can see that the number, the course that's dialed in there, changes when I turn the knob. You can see that when I line it up with the 27, it's 270. Okay, so that little tiny arrow there is basically where the course selector is pointing. And they told us to fly direct to the VOR. So as I continue to rotate this, right, we know that we have to go to the north, but as I continue to rotate it, we're going to see basically that the needle comes centered at a certain point. And if I continue the rotation all the way through to the other side, it would center again. Okay? And what we usually do is the typical technique to fly direct to a VOR is to center this thing called the CDI, a course deviation indicator. On an HSI, technically, you might call it a CDB or a course deviation bar. I'm going to put our power back up to about somewhere around 58%. Let's see how we do there with 250. Oops, wrong one. Let's put that back there. Okay. So what we would do is they would say in order to figure out like what course you need to get to the VOR when you're told to fly direct, you would center this CDI with a 2 indication. So the question then becomes well, how do I tell if it's centered on a 2 or a from? Okay. So real easy way to do that on an HSI is, first of all, we need to know what the to from indicator actually is, and that's basically this big white arrow here. Notice that it's larger than the smaller arrow that's indicating the actual course dialed in. Whenever this to from indicator is pointing in the same direction as the course that indicating arrow, the selected course, that's a to indication. When they're pointing opposite from each other, that's a from indication. Now, we could go deeper into actually what that means, and we'll get into that maybe a little bit for this flight, but we're just trying to keep it relatively simple. So basically, if I centered it right now, okay, I'm seeing a from indication. This is, the arrows are opposite. And if you think about it, right now this is saying 192. Now, if we were to fly a course of 192 from over here, we would go to the south. We would never get to the VOR. So now what we're going to do is we're going to center it with a 2, and we should see it center with the 2 indication and somewhat pointing to the north. So let's go ahead and do that. Okay, and it looks like about, if we look carefully, right, 015. So center with it 2. We're now going to turn to a course of basically a heading of 015 degrees. Okay, and now if the airplane is turning, it's going to take a little while to turn. If we look over here, this 015 here, okay, is also on this knob. I can actually control the HSI by turning this knob over here. That's the what we call that nav 1. Okay, and then my heading I can also control over here. Right, so that's pretty cool. It's doing the same thing as this knob. Okay, I can use scroll wheel on both those knobs. Alright, and there we go. So just so you see the controls and where they are, this is very convenient when setting things up quickly. Right, but it looks like we're doing pretty good. So now it looks like we're heading to the north. We have 43 miles to go to the next VOR. Okay, Natchez. But one thing we notice is that we are no longer in perfect alignment with the course, and that kind of makes sense because by the time we completed our turn, we would have drifted off the original direct course. So whenever ATC says to a pilot, fly direct to a VOR, the first time this happens, they don't actually have to make a continuous right turn to try to re-intercept. We're afforded one time to basically reset it and basically recenter it. So if I recenter it, now I see 018, and it's pretty close. So I'm going to take my airplane and make that adjustment to 018, okay, right about there. Just a few degrees. Okay, now I've purposely shut off the wind for this flight, the weather, we have standard conditions going. So we shouldn't have much of a drift, okay. So no problem. If there were wind blowing from one side to the other, we would actually have to establish like a wind correction angle, a crab angle to stay on the course. But there we go. Now we're set to fly what we call direct to the VOR. And if we have a look again over here, we are somewhere out over here to the west of Victor 71. Okay. And what I've done too is simultaneously while using the charts, these are FAA charts on a website called skyvector.com. It's free. You don't even have to sign up or anything. You can just use the charts. Excellent United States coverage. But I also have a Navigraph subscription, and as a benefit with that, they basically give you the ability to have a moving map and tell you where your airplane is. So if I were to center, I put the same flight plan in here, basically, and then we can zoom on in here, okay? And we can see that our airplane is off to the west of Victor 71, and it looks like it's heading toward Natchez. Awesome. So we're going to use this tool to help us visualize what's actually happening out there. So now we're heading toward Natchez, right? Excellent. Okay, 33 miles away. Now let's talk a little bit more about the logic of how we set up the radios. So nav 1, because we have a nav 1 and a nav 2. So here's nav 1, it's all set up, it's taking us directly to the VOR. But when we look over here at the nav 2 side, or the first officer side, if you want to call it that, on this airplane versus the captain side, well, it's not set up for us to do anything, really. You might wonder, well, why don't we just set it up to do the same thing? Well, the logic is typically, and we could do that, you know, so now it's identical. But what we typically do is we set up the nav 1 side for what we need to do now, and then we can set up the nav 2 side for what we need to do next. So the instruction was basically fly direct Natchez, then resume on navigation basically on our way to Memphis. So to get to Memphis, we need to, once we hit Natchez, navigate on this airway, Victor 554. And you can see Victor 554 basically goes out from Natchez, makes a turn, okay, and then goes into Monroe. And the question is, well, how do I know what heading to turn to stay on Victor 554? Well, every VOR is basically a transmitter that's sending a signal out in all directions, and that's basically part of the name VOR. The V is very high frequency, VHF. The O is omnidirectional, and the R is range. So it's a very high frequency omnidirectional range. It's sending out a signal in all directions. And what we do is we set up the system in such a way that we are sensing 1 degree increments, okay? And somebody might even put in the comment section more technical stuff than that if they want to. But what we do is we have designated certain, what we call these radio beams at 1 per degree. 1 per degree radio beam coming out. We call those radials. And we can see here that some of these radials are being depicted. Radials are always named after the direction they're leaving the station, so to speak. Okay? So the Victor 554 airway is made up of the 307 radial coming out of Natchez. And if you look, it is going to the northwest, so that's about 307. So we're inbound on, right now, we're on our way to Natchez, but then once we get there, what we're going to do next is go outbound on 307. So let's go ahead and put it right over here. We have nav1 on 018. It's taking us to the station. Okay, now if you notice, look, we're a little bit off. So I'm going to turn to the right about 5 degrees. Okay, 5 or 6 degrees is fine. And then what we're going to do is, maybe I'll give it another, let's do a 10 degree intercept. So 028. Okay, just to bring it back in. And we're going to set up the nav2 for 307. I could do it on this knob, or I could do it on this knob. Whatever is easier for you. You can do that, right? So we're going to put it on 307. Okay, and if we look, it kind of makes sense now. That's what's really cool about a horizontal situation indicator. This airplane on the indicator is showing us that we are on a slight intercept course to bring this back centered, right? Whereas if we jump onto this side, okay, this airplane is still flying that 026, 028 course. And when it hits this course, when it comes centered, we're going to have to make a left to go 307. And if we have a close look at this chart right here, once we get to Natchez VOR, you can see it is a significant left turn to stay on course. So that pretty much matches up with what we're seeing here. And that's the beauty of a horizontal situation indicator. It basically does a really nice job indicating your current situation in a horizontal fashion, if you want to look at it that way. Cool, we're just about back centered here. I'm going to turn back toward the original course. We only have 12 miles to go, so we can brief ourselves on one other factor here, and that is that when we're flying by ground-based VOR, if it provides distance, okay, that's a capability of the transmitter on the ground. Not all of them have that. And the airplane itself has to have the equipment to be able to read that as well. It's called DME, distance measuring equipment. So when we're basing it on the VOR signal, it's the physical distance between us and the transmitter. So if that transmitter, this VOR, was down at sea level and we're at 10,000 feet, we would get no closer at this altitude than about 1.8 miles. Okay, or give it, somebody might want to correct me and give me the exact decimal. Now, it's not a big deal. The whole point of that is to show you that as this ticks down, it might never get below 2. It might say something like 1 for a brief moment, or 2, and then it will start counting back up. So it's ticking down as we get closer to the station. We'll use that terminology quite a bit as well. Flying to and from the station, which basically means VOR. Okay. Then what will happen is suddenly it will start counting back up. Okay, so we're just about there. The other thing to keep in mind too is that once you're within a few miles, you might not try to keep trying to recenter this needle, this CDI, this course deviation indicator, because it becomes, the closer you get to it, it becomes more and more sensitive. So chasing it would be a waste of time. The way we tell whether or not, since this is never going to get to 0, the way we officially tell when we've passed the station is when this to indication flips around to a from indication. At that point, we're going to do what we're doing now to what we're doing next, which is turn to a course of 307. So that's going to happen in a moment. We did a pretty good job tracking inbound. If it starts to deflect at any point now, I'm not going to bother chasing it. The more on track you are, the quicker the flip occurs. We'll probably see that later on. Okay. And there it goes. It's showing 2. I don't know if we're going to actually see it say 1. Okay. And then at that point, I'm going to turn to a course at 307. Now, when you get better at this and more proficient, you might actually lead the turn before you even reach station in anticipation that we're going to cross over. Here is the to from flip just happened here. This thing called an RMI also basically showed a flip there. And I'm a little bit delayed on purpose, but now we're going to basically take this, okay, and put it at 307. Okay. Now, some people that might have some experience already might say, well, wait a minute, you can do one extra step, but we're purposely leaving that out. Cool. So now we're turning to a course of 307 to match what we're doing next. However, when you think about it, what we were doing next is what we are now doing now. So we could take the information from nav2 and let's go ahead and put that course into nav1. So we're going to put 307. Now, if that doesn't make sense, don't worry. We're going to repeat this several times, and hopefully it'll start to click. Okay. So now we are just about going outbound on this 307 course, and really what's happening now is we are flying parallel to the course. We're not on the course yet. Notice, if we have a close look, that our airplane is here. The course is off to the left. We have the from indication, by the way. That's switched, okay? But it's not centered, right? And the reason why that is when we made the turn, there was a radius of turn that occurred due to our speed over the ground. So what we actually need to do is continue the turn and intercept that course for the 554 radial. So rule of thumb that I usually use is that if you just cross the station, I'm going to use maybe a 20-degree intercept angle. Remember what I said before, how the radials, the navigation instruments, are quite sensitive when you're close to the VOR. So I don't want to use more. You could say, oh, let me just use a 45-degree intercept. But then when that needle starts to come in, it's going to come in real fast. You're going to overshoot. Okay? So we don't really want to do that. All right, so we're about 8 miles out. We're going to wait for this to start to come in. Hopefully it comes in nice, easy pace. And what we also need to do is set up the VOR nav2, or the HSI on nav2, to what we're doing next. Because previously, 307 was what we're doing next, but now we're doing it. So we're going to reset this to the next course. You can see now the radial is coming in, so I'm going to keep flying this heading, and I'm going to take a quick sneak peek to see what am I actually doing next. We can see that we're getting close to the course. Alright, if we go over here, we don't see the airplane, but we're flying toward the Victor 554, and the next thing we want to do is keep in mind this intersection called too low. Let's have a look, make sure that we are getting a little close. We don't want to overshoot by too much. Worst case scenario, if we did, hey, we could just basically re-intercept again. I don't want to wait for it to get centered to try to get on course. I'm just going to lead it a little bit. Hopefully we didn't wait too long. And let's go ahead and put it maybe a little bit. Let's go put it like 310 for now. Then in just in case we overshoot it. Okay, so now it looks like we're pretty much back on course. If we were to look at the Navigraph version, look at that. We're doing pretty good. Okay, we're about to cross Pisan intersection. All these little triangles are called intersections. Some of them are filled in, some of them are not. And each one of them typically has a 5-letter name. So that's why, since it's limited to 5 letters, you get some interesting names that start to develop. So our next turn on Victor 554 to stay on it is over this thing called Tulo intersection. Okay, now the reason why this one has a flag is it's called a minimum crossing altitude, but that's beyond the scope of what we're talking about for today. But what we need to do is at Tulo, we need to make a turn, otherwise we're going to fly right off the airway. Okay, so the turn, well, the question is, well, how do I know what to turn to? Well, that's going to be based on Monroe's radial. And Monroe's radial that defines the section of Victor 554 to Tulo is the 157. Remember, radials are based on which way they're going out of the station. So the 157. But if we were to turn to a course of 157 when we got to too low, we would turn the airplane around and go away. We don't want to do that. We need to go 180 degrees opposite, right? So we need to do a little math. Let's just check our airplane, see how we're doing. We're looking good. So in order really to get there, first of all, let's have a look at our other, right? Our nav2. It's still not set for what we're doing next. So what we might want to do is we could either choose to turn the OBS on nav2 for the course, or we could dial in the frequency. Now remember, we already did this on the ground, so we might go ahead and we just keep in mind the number of 157. We already have 117.2, so let's go ahead and do 117.2. Look back here, and we're going to see now the needle is like deflected instead of straight. The distance is no longer matching up, okay? But what we need to do is set up that course, okay, for the next step. So to help us visualize that, we said 157 radial. Was it 157 or 156? 157, right there. Okay. We want to go inbound on it. So if we took 157 and added 180, we should come up with 337. So let me just move it. This heading bug on the nav2 side doesn't do anything in this particular version of the airplane. So let's go ahead and set it on 337. Okay, right? And if you look, the opposite side does say 15. It's basically on the 157, right? This is 150, 160, so it looks like about 157 to me. But inbound, we're going to fly on 337. Awesome. Looks like we're set for what we're doing next. Okay. We're 27 miles out from Natchez. We are slowly intercepting the next course, the 157 radial coming out of, what was it called again? Monroe. Okay, this 157 radial doesn't just end there. It actually continues for probably another at least 10 to 20, 30, 40 miles, depending on how powerful the VOR is. By the way, some VORs have a 40-mile range. Some of them have a 130-mile range. Some of them have even more than that. Some of them only have like a 25-mile range. So we just got to keep that in mind sometimes, that we don't always pick up the signal right away. So let's go ahead and have a look. Okay, it's almost centered, right? This says 31, 32 miles. Okay, I'm going to actually pause for a moment to show you two things. So one of the ways we can tell if we are over an intersection is actually applying the textbook definition of what these triangles are. These are called intersections. And if you think about the concept, what happens is when we have a common fix that air traffic control might use to tell pilots to do something over, they want to define that in space, and they'll make an intersection like this one's called Stewie. Okay, so you have the 089 radial coming out through here, and then look at this. There is a 110.0, okay, HEZ, right? And it says 338, and it kind of traces all the way back to here, HEZ, 110.0. And what they're showing you is that the Stewie fix is the 089 radial out of Monroe intersecting with the 338 radial out of Natchez. So hence the name intersection. We can see that too low is the 307 radial out of Natchez intersecting with the 157 out of Monroe. Or if you wanted to, you could also use, they give you another option, the 036 radial out of AEX on 116.1, and that's all the way here, Alexandria 116.1 AEX. So that's basically how an intersection works. So that's based on two intersecting radials. That means we have to also tune in extra VORs. Sometimes we want to take a little shortcut. So when a VOR has DME information, the other option to identify too low is to ride on the 307 radial, okay, And then Tulo is located 34 miles DME. See how this 34, right, is encased in an elongated letter D for DME, all right? And it has an open arrow, so this isn't officially a Dme Arrow. It's just by coincidence that it's exactly 34 miles from Natchez and 34 miles from Monroe. That's usually not the case, but today it is. Okay, so if we... reason why I bring that up, keep in mind 34 and centered CDI on nav1 Natchez, and then centered CDI 157 from Monroe. So, and also 34. We go back over here. We have nav1 centered CDI. Okay. We have nav2 almost centered. Going back to nav1, 32 miles, so we're 2 miles shy. And on the nav2, it's 36 miles. So we're almost there. All right, let's keep it going. Okay, so we're going to have to change our heading from 307 to 337, or our course. So basically, that is a 30-degree turn. It takes a little while to make that turn. It's almost centered. So I'm going to actually lead the turn a little bit. And let's go ahead and put it on 337. And I'm purposely keeping the view on both VORs here. So we just went from what we were doing now to what we were doing next, 337 course to Monroe. And if you watch, what's happening is, as we've completed this turn and now we're going this 337, it makes sense that we're pulling off of the other radial, the 307. We're leaving that one, and we're somewhat tracking on this one. It looks like it's a little bit off. We can fix that. But if we wanted to visualize that on the chart, right? So we basically went here and we turned this way. The imaginary radial, or the actual radial, continuing on, we were basically flying away from it. All right, looking over here, right? You can see we're on Tulo. We're not Tulo, on Victor 554. See how we're a little bit off right now? Okay. Now keep in mind, by the way, so this is a 3-mile scale here, from here to here. So we could mentally picture that that might be about a half-mile off. Well, believe it or not, Victor Airways are designed to have a 4-mile tolerance on either side of the center line. So we could be as much as this far off and as much as this far off, and ATC might not necessarily yell at us for it. Okay, let's come back over here, and yeah, we can see that we're drifting. Okay, but before we even fix that, let's go ahead and switch what we were doing next, 337. Well, we're now doing that, so we need to put that over here. So let's dial in 337, and watch what happens over here. So when I dial in 337, I could do it down here as well, 337. Okay, but now all of a sudden we say, wait a minute, what's showing here, 27 miles, slightly deviated there, is a lot different here. 41 miles. This is a from indication. That's a to indication. What happened? Well, the thing we still need to do is switch the frequency on nav1. We were on Natchez, but now we're going to 117.2 Monroe. Okay, let me show it to you up here. So we'll zoom out a click. Okay, we were on Natchez on the way out. We made the turn, and now we're heading toward Monroe on 117.2, so we have to set up the nav1 to do that as well. But we did it ahead of time. There we go. Come back up here, and now we're going to see this start to come back in. Okay, we can see that we got 23 miles to go. We're a little bit off. Why don't we go ahead and take, I don't know, maybe a 15-ish degree intercept. So 347 is a 10 degree. So 352. Again, you don't have to be that precise. Whatever you feel would get you back on course, and that you'll develop with experience. Cool. Awesome. So we have 20 miles to go. We are now set up on our nav1 of what we're doing now. But the thing is, on our nav2, we're also set up what we're doing now, when the logic was what? We want to set that up for what we're doing next. So let's go ahead while this is starting to come back in. All right, you see we're getting back on course. We need to set up what we're doing next. In other words, once we cross Monroe, what are we going to do next? We're going to turn on to Victor 397. In order to do that, we're going to have to turn on to the 053 radial. So let's go ahead and put that in here, 053. Okay. And we have that set up there, right? This is almost centered. Okay, I'm going to just turn the airplane back to, I'm going to put it at about 340 for now. Alright. And we're set up for what we're doing next. But the other thing we want to keep in mind is, look, we're using the 117.2s, but we have these blank slots that we're no longer using. So let's put in another VOR that's going to be after Monroe. And that's going to be Greenville on 110.0. So let's go ahead and put that in. And 110.2, right? 110.2 and 110.2. Cool. So now we have our frequency set. Looking pretty good on course. We have about 14 miles to go. All right. And yeah, I think we're doing pretty well. Okay, well, now we're going to advance this a little bit. If you've noticed, I've made some turns using the heading select function. The next one we're going to do is we're going to use the autopilot's VOR localizer tracking. If you look over here, it says nav loc on the autopilot. Okay, I'm not using the flight director today, but you could if you wanted to. But we're just using the autopilot. Over here it says nav loc. Over here it says VOR loc. Essentially, they are going to do this. This light is going to come on in relation to activating this. So when we cross this VOR, I'm actually going to purposely let it fly out a little bit more. And then I'm going to turn the airplane. And if you think about it, well, which way should we turn? To what we're doing next, 053. Okay. But if you remember, when we did the first turn, we turned 307 and we paralleled it, right? So when we came from over Natchez, turned 307, paralleled, and then said, hey, let's turn onto the course. What we're going to do in this case is, instead of running parallel at 053, let's just turn that extra 20 degrees, 20 degrees more. So it's going to be 073. Now that's kind of hard to visualize here, but it's easy to see here. I think it's easier to see here on the HSI. If you're going to turn 053, if you want to turn 20 degrees more, it's about 073. You can sort of, the HSI is a great thing in that it helps you visualize your courses. This is starting to drift, but we're pretty close to the VOR. Okay. So, I'm not going to chase it too much. I just made a slight turn so that it doesn't get really far. Okay. The reason why I want to fly a little bit past the VOR before I actually make the turn is just to allow us some more time for the demonstration purpose. If you were flying this and you're getting more and more proficient at it, you would just immediately turn to stay tight to the course. Okay, so we're at 10,000 feet. This is saying 4 miles. It's slowly drifting. I'm going to maybe give it a couple more degrees. We didn't track as nicely to this one as we did on the other one. After we complete this turn, I'm going to set up another VOR, and then I'm also going to show you another tool that you can use to help you practice with an X-plane itself. Okay, it's saying 2 miles. Right? It's somewhat coming back in. It's actually coming in pretty quick now. I'm not going to chase it. I'll just let it go right through, and we're going to wait for that to from flip. So the to from flip is the official crossing of the station. There it goes, flipping around. It's probably now going to come back in, which is totally normal. Okay, I'll let it come back in a little bit. I'm going to wait until about I don't know, at least 4 miles, just for the demonstration purpose. Normally we would be turning by now. Okay, and what's going to happen is, when I begin the turn to 053, we're going to put another 20 degrees into it. And then I'm going to activate this function here, and we're going to pay attention to the color of the lights that appear here. Okay. All right, cool. So it looks like about 4 miles out. Let's go. So here would be 053 to run it parallel. Okay. Let's take it over to 073. All right, about there. Then we want to set what we're doing next, 053, to what we're doing now. So we're going to put that at 053. Okay. Let's go ahead and go to 073. And then I'm going to activate the VOR localizer. Now look at this. The heading select stays green, so it's still armed, or rather using that mode. but it's armed the feature to track the actual radial, okay, the VOR. Right now it's armed. When it acquires it, okay, when it captures it, it's going to go from amber to green. So just think of the amber is armed, green, it's like, all right, I got this. And then what's really cool about this feature is that the airplane will all by itself turn onto the course once this CDI comes centered. Now it has some limitations. The current version of the airplane I'm flying sometimes will, be a little sluggish to track it, but sometimes it works great. Okay, the real airplane actually also had some reliability issues, but that was just by coincidence that the current coding is like that. But so by the time you get to see this video and practice it, it might even work better. So I personally like to use the heading select mode like we were doing before because it just keeps you in tune with the airplane. But sometimes we want to look out the window for longer periods of time, so we'll use the autopilot to track the radials. Okay, we can see that it's still taking some time to come in. If we wanted to, we could be a little bit more aggressive. Maybe do a 30-degree intercept, so 083. Okay. And then we're going to end up seeing, eventually this is going to come alive. The airplane might do some extra maneuvering when it first starts to capture it. Alright. And I'm just going to keep, I was going to show you a different screen, but let's just stay focused on this for now. Alright, and we'll see how we're doing here. So, we could, at the same time, let's go ahead and pull up the map view actually. Okay, and the map view is activated with the letter M. Okay, and this is actually, and you can set it to whatever. If you're flying Victor Airways, use the low en route chart. If you're using high altitude, you use high en route. Okay, because that's what will display the actual, airways. All right. So let's see how we're doing over here. It should be coming active in another couple of moments. All right. Oh, here it is. See how now the airplane is actually, right now the airplane tends to turn to the right once it comes active, and then it swings back to the left. We'll see if future versions of this model continue to do that. Okay, and now you're going to see the airplane actually intercept this radial, roll pretty smoothly onto it. It's going to ignore the heading select button. Notice that went to off. You don't see it lit up here anymore. Okay, and this went green. So it's going to track what we have selected here, 053. Cool. Okay. Now, just because this is not being used at the moment doesn't mean we shouldn't use it. It's good practice to basically have the airplane set up so that whatever the heading rolls out to, you put your heading select on that heading just to stay in tune with what's going on. And also, let's say if air traffic control said to you, we need to, they wouldn't say it like this, but they might say, we need you to come off this airway for spacing purposes, turn right to a heading of 120. So all you have to do is hit heading select and then turn it. And then it would switch the mode from VOR tracking to heading select. All right, and I'll actually demonstrate that in a little bit. Excellent. So let's have a quick review so far of what we've done. If we zoom in here, okay, we can actually see, hopefully we didn't go too far. All right, so this is when we went direct to Natchez. We overshot it. All right, we flew parallel to the course, and then I said, hey, we got to establish an intercept, and we did that. And we were using the heading select function to do that. Then we weren't perfectly on the airway, but we turned over too low. That's when we really drifted for a little bit. Then we got back on, okay? And then we said, hey, after we cross the next VOR, we're going to go a little bit further on purpose, establish an intercept angle, and then activate the VOR loc tracking, which we did. And then I said, hey, the 20 degree is taking us a while to get back on course. Let's add another 10 degrees, which we did. And then at one point we saw it actually take an extra turn and finally get on the airway. And you can see it's doing a real nice job. The cool thing with this map is like the airplane moves quite fluidly on, like real time on the map. So you can actually see what's going on these charts. Pretty neat. But you can see right now it's doing a pretty good job tracking. Okay. So let's go ahead and get that out of here. You can hit the M key again. Or, X out of it. Cool. Okay, so let's see. We're 26 miles out. We're not even set up for what we're doing next because we were talking a lot. So we did at least put in the next VOR, Greenville 110.2, I think. But the question is, when do we turn to Greenville? So we're on Victor 397, and we're going to turn over this intersection. Again, another 5-letter name, Anpi, I guess. Anpi? I have no idea. And what defines Anpi? So we have a couple ways of defining it. One, we have the 053 radial coming out of Monroe, and the 203 radial coming out of Greenville. That's pretty much what we're going to use. We also have, you see how it's a hollow arrow? That's a Dme Arrow. And since there's only, this is the first fix after Monroe, they put the 41 down over here. The distance between Monroe and Anpi is 41 miles. Okay. They also show you 42 miles from Greenville, and they give you the Dme Arrow here. The reason why they put the big D here is because there's also other distances being displayed between Greenville and Ruts. Between Ruts and Juden is 6, 21, 6, 15 from Juden to Anpi. If you add them all up, it's 42. Who wants to do math in a high workload situation? Why waste that mental energy? So use what we have on the chart. Key thing we want, oh, and there's also another cross radial coming out of Monticello 152. We're not going to use that today. So we're going to use Greenville's 203 radial, but we need the inbound course to it, 180 degrees opposite. So let's go ahead and figure what that is. If we did the math, of course, we did say we didn't want to do math, right? So let's, rule of thumb, if you want to fly outbound on a radial, you put it at the top of the indicator. If you want to fly inbound on a radial, you put the radial at the bottom. So let's go, we want to fly inbound on it. So let's put that 203 at the bottom. So here's 210, 200. Okay, so looks like about 203, that's 205. And wait, look at that, we did it wrong. I put 203 here. That's not the bottom of the indicator. Swing it around. Okay. We want the tail end of the needle opposite the course arrow on 203. Okay. So 203 outbound, the inbound course is 180 degrees opposite, 023. Cool. So now we have the course set correctly. But the next thing we need to do, and we're running out of time, we're almost there, we need to activate the frequency, 110.2. Okay, we were talking a lot, and we were a little bit slow, so this is probably already centered. Yeah, okay, look at that. It's just about centered. I'm going to show you on the map what happened there. Let's first turn the airplane to 023. Oh, look, we can't do that, right? Because we have loc. Okay, so let me show you how to do that. Let's line it up here, okay? Activate heading select. Turn the airplane to 023. Right? Okay, we were a little late on the turn. Look, we already went past it a little bit. Okay, I'm going to show you that. This is great that we make these little mistakes now, because it's going to always happen occasionally. That's kind of contradictory, but you get the idea. We make mistakes and we try to correct them. So you can see what happened was by the time we actually tuned in the other radial, because I was talking about all these different symbols and stuff, we were just about on top of the fix. Okay, so we've made the turn. We're a little bit off. All right, we got to re-intercept the 203 radial and take it inbound. So we did say before that we would want to maybe do some sort of intercept. Actually, before we do that, let's take again what we were doing next is 023. Let's put it on what we're doing now. Now I'm going to intentionally look at both indicators so we can see them and at what they show us. This one is showing 37 miles, two indication to the station, 023. We're going to put 023 here. But oddly, you're like, wait a minute. This says 36. This one says 47. This says a to indication. This says a from indication. This is fully deflected. This is not. What happened? Well, that's because just because we turned the course, we also have to put in the frequency, 110.2. See how we have it here? But we didn't put it here yet. So let's go ahead and put that in. Excellent. We come up here. And now we see the distances reading differently, and it's coming centered. All right, cool. Now, if we wanted to, we could re-engage our VOR loc tracking. And when you're this close, you don't even really need to use the heading select and track. I can just switch this over, and you'll see the airplane will make a turn and get back on there for us. It's going to make a gentle turn and keep tracking. Cool. Excellent. So now let's have a look and see what's actually happening. We're inbound to Greenville on the 203 radial. And what we're going to do is let's stay ahead of the airplane. Let's set up what we're going to do next. I'll also show it to you here since many folks don't have the Navigraph. So we're inbound here. Once we hit Greenville, we're going to go outbound on 040. So let's go ahead and put that in. Nav2 is what we're doing next at 040. Okay. Doing a nice job tracking inbound at this point. Excellent. All right. We have 28 miles to go. If we look down here again, we're going to see that we're using 110.2 on both. And we have the 117.2 no longer being used because we've passed that station. So let's go ahead and use that. So the next station after Greenville is going to be Holly Springs, 112.4. Okay. So let's go ahead and put in 112.4 here. All right. And 112.4 here. Okay, cool. So now we're set up for the VOR afterward. We're currently still flying. So Holly Springs is over here. And we're flying out of Greenville. No, I'm sorry. We're still flying into Greenville. Sometimes when you go to set up the next VOR after, it's easy to confuse yourself if you're not really careful. Okay. Excellent. So we're on our way to Greenville. Let's see how much time we have. We're just at 23 miles, right? We're set up for inbound on the 023 course, outbound on 040. And then when we make this turn, what's going to happen is we're going to fly to a next VOR, but there's no turns in the airway. So we're going to talk about that next. So in the meantime, we're going to shorten the flight a bit, basically by editing out this downtime, and we'll tune back in just a moment. All right, we're back. We're within 7 miles of the VOR, probably less because you remember that slant range distance. When we left off, we were inbound on a course of 023 into, I believe, Greenville. And when we cross it, we're going to go outbound on a 040 course. We're currently tracking using the VOR autopilot. And what we're going to do is, for a moment before we cross, we're actually going to switch it back over to manual. Okay. For some reasons, you can get away with not doing that. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to put this on heading select. Okay. Then once we cross this station, we're going to turn to the next course with that 20-degree intercept. So it's going to be turning to 040 would be parallel, plus another 20 would be the 060. And then once we're established on that, or heading toward that intercept angle, we're going to re-engage the VOR tracking. If we didn't do that, and we just relied on turning the OBS while it was tracking, it might start to turn to the left if we do it at the wrong time, or it might be delayed in turning. So we're going to keep it as smooth as possible. I know I threw a lot of that out at you at that moment, so after you watch this happen, you can always rewind the video to see basically how that actually plays out and do it again. So here it goes, full scale deflection. There goes a 2-from switch, or 2-from flip. So now let's go ahead and start turning the airplane to 040, we said. But then we said, well, wait a minute. We're going to do another 20 degrees, 060. Now, before you actually engage the VOR tracking, it's very important to take that nav1 and also set it to what you're doing now, which is at 040. If we didn't do that, it might have started turning the other way. Let's flip it back over here, and now look again. We have we had it for a moment. It was armed, but actually it very quickly acquired because look how fast we made the turn. Okay. We might see it fishtail a little bit. If you notice that when the airplane first acquired the radial coming in, it actually started to turn more aggressively before it started to intercept back the other way, or basically shallow out the intercept. So like I said, it depends on which version of the 737 you're flying. By the time you see this video, they might have improved on that behavior, but no big deal. Either way, look at this. We're right back on course. If we were to actually look at the results of that intercept, it was probably, well, number one, it was a relatively short turn, but look how quick we crossed and got right back on course compared to some of the other ones that we were either intentionally going further out or just kind of being sloppy in general. Like here, ANP, remember we went too far. Over here I went intentionally far out and turned around. Okay, but you know, with some practice, oh, we ran out of space to scroll back to. With some practice, even on manual, you will start doing these very tight turns, and sometimes even leading the turning, nailing it. So that's kind of part of the fun of the challenge of flying VORs also, is to say, hey, how accurately can I do this? Cool. Okay. So we're going to do two things. First of all, now that we're heading outbound on 040, we have it set over here. Okay. We basically have, excuse me, both VORs set to do the same thing, but what's the rule of thumb? Nav 1 is what we're doing now. Nav 2 is what we're doing next. So this is a new little concept that we have to deal with, and that is, how do you decide when to switch from one VOR to the next when there's no turns in the airway? Every airway we've flown over so far in the demonstration has had a turn in it near the halfway point, right? But in this one, we don't have any turns. So there's a general rule of thumb that we use, and that is basically when you're flying between two VORs, you're going to switch at the halfway point, unless there's a symbol that depicts otherwise. And if I remember toward the end of the video, I'll try to find one and show you. In fact, I see one right now, so I'll do it almost immediately. So the question is, well, how many miles are there between Greenville and Holly Springs? Actually, you know what we need to do? First, let's set up Holly Springs. We're outbound on the 040, okay, right over there from Greenville. So one might think of, well, we're going to go inbound on the 220, which is the reciprocal radial coming out of Holly Springs. But notice it says 222. Okay, and there's some technical reasons why sometimes, even if it's a straight leg, there might be a couple of degrees difference between the two VORs, but we're not going to bother getting into that today. So what we need to do is set up for the inbound out of Holly Springs on 222, but it's going to be inbound, which is the opposite direction, right? So first, let's make sure we have 12.4, 112.4, and the 222 set up. So we go down here, we go to 12.4, 112.4, okay? And then we can come on this side and basically adjust our view so that we can see the VOR. And whoa, wait a minute. I'm not even picking it up yet. Okay, let's verify that we do have 112.4. It's active. Okay. We come over here, Holly Springs. We have that dialed in, but for whatever reason, we're not picking it up yet. And you know what? The reason would be is because that airway is longer than the range of that VOR. But once we get near the halfway point, this is going to come in. So even though we don't have an active signal in it, we can still set the course up for it. And just to review why I know I don't have a course for it, there's no distance. That's not the tell-all. The tell-all is the VOR loc flag. Okay, that flag being here means that there is no valid signal. If we look at the other one that has a valid signal, the flag's not there. Okay, so that will eventually come in. Okay, so we're going to go inbound on the 22. Oh, look at that. Perfect. By chance, we got lucky and the demonstration worked out perfect. It just came alive. Flag disappeared, distance showed up, and the CDI deflected. We said that we need this to be on the 222, but we're going inbound on it. So we're going, so the 222 comes out of the station, but we need to be going to the station. We want it to be a 2. Okay? A 2 indication. So look at this. 040. The 2 from an arrow is pointing in the same direction as the course arrow. okay? But we don't want 220 or 040, we want 222. So that's going to be opposite of 042. Whoops, we got a little crazy with the scroll wheel sport. There we go. And look at that. Centered. Over here. Pretty well centered. Okay. So now the question is, well, when do we switch from the nav 1 to the nav 2? We said that before. Halfway point. Okay. So how do we determine the halfway point? Well, we could again say, hey, let's add up all these. 17, 15. Oh, here's a 32. Here's a 43. Add all these up together. But what we didn't cover before on some of the other airways is this funny number with a box around it. This odd number with a box. This is always going to tell you, anytime it's in a box, it's basically telling you what the overall distance of this airway segment between Greenville in this case and Holly Springs. So one can say that Victor 94 between Greenville and Holly Springs is a total of 105 miles. So the halfway point is going to be 52.5. Okay, so we're 34 out from Greenville, 71 from Holly Springs. Once these are very close to matching up, we're at the halfway point and we'll make our switch. Cool. So now let's have a look at one last thing while we have some time. And that is we have 110.2 set up for what we're doing now. 112.4 for what we're doing next on the nav 2. We also have a nav 1, the 112.4 in the standby because we have to switch from what we're doing next to what we're doing now. So hopefully by this point it's starting to make a little sense. But then we have this 110.2 over here that we're not using in the nav 2. We're never going to dial that in. We already used it in the nav 2. So we have an extra frequency slot. So for the demonstration purposes, let's go ahead and plan to turn. We could begin a turn if we wanted to after reaching Holly Springs, continuing, let's say, on Victor 11. Okay. And Victor 11 would be after Holly Springs. Eventually, we'd have to go to Dryersburg. So we can go ahead and... Actually, let me just zoom out a click. Drag this up. Drop it. Choose Dryersburg. Okay. And ignore what this just did. We're interested in this over here. It auto planned us back to the airport. Okay. Oh, I see what it did. It tried to put in an arrival. I can just delete that. Okay. Okay, cool. So the next turn after Holly Springs would be to Dryersburg. So we wouldn't put in any of these courses yet because both of them are being used, but we could put in the frequency Dryersburg on 116.8. So let's go ahead and do that and put that here. 116.8. So now we really have the frequencies sort of mapped out for the next few miles. Excellent. Look at this. We're all this chatting and setting up, and we're already 45 miles out. We're almost to the halfway point. Cool. The last thing I'm going to demonstrate for this flight, really, because we've covered almost everything for just the basics of VOR navigation, is I'm going to just show you that as we are flying and we're tracking on the autopilot for the navigation, basically the VOR tracking, that when we switch from what we're doing now to what we're doing next, again, we're going to want to switch to either heading select or just simply manual mode so that the wings stay level, and then we'll flip the VORs, and I'll show you why we would want to do that in just a minute. So look at this. We're just about at the halfway point. Okay, it's going to be 52.5. At one point this might say 52, this one might say 54, or just getting to 53. We'll see how that plays out. And I'll tell you what, I'll show you one other thing. Okay, I'm not too worried if we go a little bit past. We said it was the halfway point unless otherwise depicted. So I saw that on the chart just before, right? So this one was based on the halfway point, as most of them are. Like even over here from Pine Bluff, let's say, to Marville, If you were flying on this airway, Victor 16, okay, you would switch at the halfway point, half of that based on the 65, so 32.5. But then if we look at Pine Bluff over to Gilmore, it's 97. So you would think, okay, halfway between Gilmore and Pine Bluff, 97 miles. So half of that would be what? It would be, I'm losing my mind here, 48.5. Am I right on that? Okay. So that would be the halfway point. However, what's interesting is there's this interesting symbol here, and it says 56 and 41. This is what we call a changeover point, a depicted changeover point. So this is when you wouldn't follow the rule of thumb. Okay, you would use, if you were coming out of Pine Bluff, you would ride on this radial, the 043, to 41 miles out, and then you'd ride the rest of the remaining 56 miles to Gilmore, okay, on the 224. Or if you were coming out of Gilmore on the 224, you would stay past the halfway point, past that 48.5, and then you would switch at 56, and then the rest of the 41 going inbound. So, anyway, basically that's really it as far as most of the concepts that we're going to do. Now let's just switch over from Greenville to Holly Springs, okay? Remember, we were going outbound on the 040. We already passed the halfway point. Now we have to switch over to the 222 radial, okay? So we're a little bit late because we were chatting, but we said, oh, we want to switch over to either heading select, okay, or manual mode. So if I switch over to manual mode, watch what happens. Nothing. And that's good. It's basically the autopilot is going to just hold the wings level. Then what we need to do is take this and set it up for what we were doing next, which is 042, into what we're doing now. So we can put in 042. But then, whoa, wait a minute, look, the CDI deflected. That's because we didn't switch the frequency over. If we were on VOR tracking, the airplane would have started turning unnecessarily. Now we go down, switch to Holly Springs, 112.4. Come back up. This should start now coming centered or closer to what we saw than before. Okay, good. And then if we wanted to, we could then basically go back and switch to VOR tracking. It might do a little bit of a turn because we let it drift a little bit. Not much. And there we go. Now we're inbound. Okay, we're all set. And I guess the last thing to show you would be we're inbound to Holly Springs. We're done with Greenville on 110.2, so we can put in that other VOR, Dryersville or whatever it was called, 16.8. And we would all be set up again. And you could just do this across the entire United States or anywhere in the world that has VORs. So hope this helps you guys out. Hope you guys enjoy some cool VOR flying in either the FlyJSim 737-200, the 727 series, or any other airplane that you enjoy trying to do some old school navigation. All right, guys, take care and enjoy this flyby as we leave.